There is a man you have probably seen before, maybe you are him. He stopped pursuing relationships, not suddenly, not dramatically, not after some catastrophic heartbreak that left visible scars. He simply stopped, quietly, deliberately. And the world, watching from the outside, immediately reached for the nearest explanation. He must be broken. He must be afraid. He must have been rejected so many times that something inside him finally gave up, and learned to call that giving up a kind of peace. The assumption is almost automatic. A man who does not chase must be a man who cannot catch. A man who steps back from the game must be a man who lost too many times and decided to stop keeping score. But here is what most people never stop long enough to consider. Sometimes the man who goes quiet is the most awake person in the room. Sometimes the stillness is not the symptom of a wound, it is the consequence of understanding. And that understanding, once it arrives, changes everything. How he sees himself, how he sees others, what he is willing to accept for the rest of his life. Stay with this, because what comes next is something very few people will ever tell you. What he is walking away from is not love. Let that land before you move past it. He is not rejecting connection. He is not turning his back on intimacy or warmth or the genuine desire to be truly known by another person. What he is refusing, and this distinction matters enormously, is the performance. The relentless, exhausting, identity-dissolving performance that modern romantic pursuit so often demands. Think about what that actually looks like. The careful calibration of every message, interested but not too interested, available but not desperate, confident but never arrogant. The constant mental calculation of where you stand in someone else's estimation. The slow erosion of your own preferences, your own rhythm, your own way of moving through the world, all of it quietly surrendered in service of making yourself acceptable to someone who may not even know what they want. He watched this happen to himself. He watched himself become smaller, more anxious, more reactive, more performance-driven. And at some point, with a clarity that felt almost physical, he recognized it. He was not seeking love. He was auditioning for it. And he got tired of auditioning for people who were equally lost, equally performing, equally uncertain, seeking in him the same relief they could not find inside themselves. Here is where this gets honest. Chasing connection can become its own kind of addiction. This is not an indictment, it is a diagnosis, and like most addictions, it disguises itself as something noble. A man tells himself he wants love, he wants closeness, he wants to build something real with another person. And perhaps those desires are genuine, but underneath them, quietly powering the whole engine, is something else. The need for approval, the need for external confirmation that he is desirable, that he is enough, that the silence inside him does not mean what he fears it means. He is not pursuing women, he is pursuing relief. Relief from the low-grade anxiety that lives in him when no one is reflecting his worth back at him. And so he texts when he should rest. He invests emotionally in people he barely knows, because the prospect of their attention is more bearable than his own company. He settles, not once, dramatically, but repeatedly, incrementally, for whoever is available, because available feels like chosen, and chosen feels like safe. He dreads weekends with no plans, not because he dislikes solitude, but because in this state, a solitude is not rest, it is exposure. And exposure to himself is the one thing the chase was designed to prevent. When he finally stops, the first thing that happens is nothing glamorous. There is no sudden peace, no immediate clarity, no cinematic sense of arrival. What comes first is silence. And the silence is strange. The absence of the pursuit creates a kind of withdrawal that is genuinely uncomfortable, because the body and the mind had grown accustomed to the stimulation. Nights feel longer, the phone offers less. The ego, which had been quietly sustained by the low-level drama of romantic possibility, begins to panic. He notices how much of his internal world had been organized around a single question: how am I being perceived by someone, by anyone? He realizes with a discomfort that is also a gift, how dependent he had become on outside attention as a form of self-regulation. How much of what he called desire was actually just noise, filling the space where a relationship with himself should have been. This is not regression. This is not failure. This is detox. the first stage of reclaiming something that had been slowly handed over, piece by piece, in exchange for moments of feeling chosen. He is not retreating from life. He is returning to himself. And that is the only place from which a real life can actually begin. Something shifts in his perception once the desperation is gone. It does not happen overnight. It does not announce itself. But gradually, without the fog of need distorting everything, he begins to see people more accurately. The red flags he once rationalized or romanticized or decided to overlook because the alternative was loneliness, they become simply visible. Not alarming, just clear. He sees incompatibility for what it is, rather than for what he wished it would become, with enough patience, enough effort, enough quiet sacrifice of what he actually needs. He stops watching beauty override behavior. He stops building narratives around people who give him inconsistency, who go warm and cold, who offer just enough to keep him invested and just little enough to keep him uncertain. He had called that chemistry before. He had called it depth. He had called it the beautiful complexity of real human connection. Now he recognizes it for what it is, misalignment. And misalignment, he understands, is not a project. It is not something to fix with more understanding, more compromise, more patience. It is simply information. He looks at a person now and asks, not whether they are exciting, but whether they are consistent. Not whether they are compelling, but whether they are clear. His standards rise, and they rise quietly, not as an act of arrogance, but as a natural consequence of no longer needing to settle. When a man is operating from scarcity, his standards bend. They bend to accommodate whoever is available, because available is better than the alternative he fears. But when that fear dissolves, when he genuinely becomes comfortable inside his own presence, something resets. He becomes selective, the way people become selective about anything they have learned to value. His peace becomes expensive, not in a transactional sense, in a fundamental one. Access to his time, his attention, his emotional investment, these carry real weight now, because he knows what they cost him, and he knows what it feels like when they are poured into places that were never right for them. He begins to understand, at a level that is no longer theoretical, that he would rather be alone and aligned with himself than partnered and slowly hollowed out by a connection that was never built on anything real. A man who has found genuine peace inside himself becomes very difficult to manipulate, not because he is cold, not because he is hardened or bitter or closed, but because manipulation requires leverage, and the only leverage that truly works on a man is the thing he is afraid to lose. When he is no longer afraid, when he no longer needs external validation to feel stable, there is simply nothing to pull on. He becomes, in the truest sense, free. And this is where other people get uncomfortable, because when a man steps back from the pursuit, when he opts out of the game that everyone around him is still playing, the reactions are rarely neutral. Some call him insecure, avoidant, emotionally unavailable. Some say he must have been hurt badly, that there must be a wound he has not dealt with, some trauma he is running from, dressed up in the language of self-development. Some say, with genuine conviction, that he will regret it, that he's wasting the good years, that a man who does not pursue is a man who will end up alone and bitter, wondering where the time went. What they almost never say is that maybe he is right, because here is the uncomfortable truth beneath all of it. Society is deeply uncomfortable with men who cannot be baited by approval. Men who do not need to be chosen, who are not quietly desperate for selection, break something in the predictable social script. They cannot be steered by the promise of access. They cannot be shamed into participating in dynamics that do not serve them. Independent men disturb systems that depend on dependence. And so the resistance is not really about concern for him. It is about the dissonance his independence creates in people who have not yet found their own. What fills the space he reclaims is not emptiness. This is one of the great lies told about the man who steps back, that without the pursuit his life contracts, that he becomes grey, solitary, diminished. The opposite is almost always true. The energy he was spending on chasing uncertainty, on managing expectations, on the emotional labor of romantic performance, that energy does not disappear. It redirects into his body, into discipline, into the physical self he had been neglecting while he was busy seeking approval from people whose opinion of him he could not control, into his finances, into a clarity about the future that becomes possible when he is not constantly destabilized by the turbulence of the wrong connections, into his work, into the creative projects that had been quietly waiting for him to show up with his full attention, into brotherhood, into friendships with men who are on the same path, who understand what it means to build something inward before reaching outward, into stillness, into a relationship with silence that stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like instruction. He becomes more, not despite the absence of pursuit, because of it. And if love comes now, when it enters this version of him, everything about the dynamic is different. He is not the man who was choosing from scarcity. He is not the man who was settling because available felt like enough. He is not the man who confused the relief of not being alone with the presence of something real. He chooses now. He does not beg. He observes rather than fantasizes. He watches how a person behaves over time rather than projecting onto them the story he wishes were true. He values consistency over chemistry because he has learned, finally, at some cost, that chemistry without character is just chaos wearing an attractive face. And perhaps most importantly, he can walk away. Not easily, not without feeling, not from a place of coldness, but without collapsing. Without losing himself in the process, without needing the connection to survive. Love, when it arrives now, arrives as an addition to a life that is already whole, not as a rescue from one that is not. This is what healthy love actually requires, not two people filling each other's emptiness. Two people who have already done enough of the work to stand on their own, choosing each other from that place of groundedness rather than from the desperation of need. Most men only ever see two paths. The first is the one everyone around them is walking. Pursue relentlessly, invest constantly, make yourself available, make yourself appealing, keep chasing until something sticks. The second is the one that bitterness leads to, withdrawal driven not by clarity but by pain. Cynicism masquerading as wisdom. Closing off not because you have found peace, but because the hurt was too much and the walls felt safer. Both paths are understandable, both paths are human. But there is a third path, and most men never find it. It is the path of the man who remains open, genuinely, warmly open to connection, to love, to the possibility of something real, but who does not depend on it, who is not organized around the hope of it, who has built enough inside himself that the absence of a relationship is not experienced as failure, and its presence is not experienced as rescue. A calm man, a grounded man. A man who desires connection but does not ache for it the way he once did, not because he has become cold, but because he has become full. That is the rarest thing, and it is not found by chasing. It is found by stopping, by going inward, by doing the work that most men avoid because it asks them to sit with themselves long enough to actually see what is there. If any of this resonated with you, and I think it did, otherwise you would not still be here, I want to speak to you directly for a moment. You're not becoming cold, you're not closing off, you're not damaged or broken or giving up on something you deserve. You are becoming clear, and clarity in a world that profits from your confusion is one of the most radical things you can build inside yourself. Do not mistake this season for failure. Do not let the discomfort of the withdrawal, the strange silence, the nights that feel long, the moments when the old pattern pulls at you, convince you that stepping back was a mistake. Solitude, chosen with intention, is not loneliness. It is construction. You're not falling behind. You are building something most men never take the time to build, a relationship with yourself that is stable enough, honest enough, and grounded enough to support everything else that comes after. Use this season. Do not waste it looking backward. The world misunderstands men who step back. It always has. It sees the distance and calls it damage. It sees the quiet and calls it defeat. It sees a man who has stopped performing and assumes he has given up. But distance, chosen consciously, creates vision. Silence, used well, rebuilds identity. And the man who does this work, who goes through the discomfort of the withdrawal, who learns to see clearly without the fog of desperation, who builds his life from the inside out, that man does not disappear from the story. He returns to it different, more himself, more grounded, more capable of genuine connection than he has ever been, precisely because he stopped needing it to feel whole. If you're in this phase right now, protect it. Do not let anyone rush you out of it. Do not let guilt or social pressure or someone else's discomfort with your independence pull you back into patterns that were never serving you. And if this spoke to something real in you, drop the word clarity in the comments. Not for me, for yourself. As a small acknowledgement that you heard this, that it landed somewhere true, and that you're taking it seriously. Because quiet men change loud lives. And the work you are doing right now, in the stillness, in the silence, in the season that most people will never understand, is the most important work you will ever do. Subscribe if you want more of this. There is much more to say.